Here's a question a lot of us are asking ourselves today. How do marketers build genuine, durable trust when the cost of generating volumes of AI content is basically zero? How can you argue for making humanly crafted content in small quantities when it's so easy to have AI pump it out in big quantities? The hard truth is that humans are wired to notice what other humans do. Meaningful communication with buyers contains elements that just don't scale. This takes more than a trivial amount of work to do. But to marketers, that is precisely why we need to do them. Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the podcast for analytically minded marketers. A new book came out in 2025 called Human-Centered Marketing: How to Connect with Audiences in the Age of AI. And it goes over this territory saying that even though AI is all around us and it looks set to marginalize content marketing, the book predicts that the knock-on effects of AI will bring old retro practices back into vogue. If Wired magazine were to meme this using their wired, tired, expired phrasing, it might go like this: humans interacting with no machines, expired; machines monopolizing interactions, tired; human-to-human interaction via machine, wired. The book also argues that marketing and communication folks have to make different types of content for segments of the buyer journey. And those all have to be held to different goals and different time horizons. Buyers are getting savvier, and we need to meet them. We can't dump random content on social channels. Like instruments in a score, the pieces need to work together, not just be there and add noise. The book also says that being human-centered, it extends to where and how we use our messages, using our own physical selves. Our leaders have to go to trade shows. We have to make podcasts. We have to meet people. We have to have real conversations. And trust grows when customers feel seen and heard by these things. That book is authored by someone who, by day, is a speaker and is currently head of life cycle marketing at Canva. By night, she's a singer, actor, and a fitness fiend. Let's go now to Northern California to talk with Ashley Faus. Ashley Faus, welcome to Funnel Reboot.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm really glad to. You wrote a book recently, Ashley. What is the name of your book?
I did. My book is titled Human-Centered Marketing: How to Connect with Audiences in the Age of AI.
Yeah. So about that AI, we got a bit of a problem, don't we, Ashley? If I look at headlines, we've been hearing about AI slop. We've been hearing about people not paying attention to content that is being made by the truckload by AI. If we kept going along this way, what do you think is going to happen?
I think the biggest thing that's going to happen is, I guess there's a couple of things. First of all, we have already seen an erosion of trust with all of this. The barrier to entry to just say whatever you want at scale and have that go viral or have that travel and get twisted out of context, that's something that we've been experiencing for years already with social media. AI just accelerates that. People who previously didn't have time to craft something in writing or via video or with images, didn't have time to Photoshop it themselves, the barrier to entry is low. So I think the first that we're already seeing is the erosion of trust. I think the second thing that we're going to see, and this is something I've started to think about, especially with the younger generation like Gen Alpha, is being able to discern what is real and what is fake. And again, we've seen this already with airbrushing and Photoshop and editing and ghostwriters. And we've seen this on social media for a long time and TV and movies for a long time already. But again, AI just accelerates that because the barrier to entry is so much lower to make misinformation or disinformation or fake things. And so I think as we think about that from a marketing perspective, we have always been in the business of shaping perceptions and trying to build trust and trying to build affinity. And so, how do we balance our job where it's to show ourselves as the best possible solution for the problems that our audience has, but to still maintain that trust when it's easier than ever to break that trust with a deluge of poor quality information, or in some cases, a deluge of fake information?
And that trust can be easily squandered if we keep doing the things that we've done in the past. You've pointed out quite rightly that marketers fall into habits of using things like military jargon in describing how we want to do things. We want to hunt down prospects and campaign against them until they are in our funnel and then we've captured them. You point out rightly, we have to look in the mirror and ask, is that how we want to be treated? The thing that I think is also happening, and you pointed it out, is we're getting mixed messages from the very platforms that are ushering in this age of AI. Google, for example, you pointed out that they have looked through their content evaluation guidelines, which had for a decade been EAT, and then they added a new E at the beginning of that, E for experience, which means lived experience that only humans can have. And then you pointed out that there's a filter on the search engine results for forums, which aren't going to look at pages that may have been AI authored. They're looking at what people are doing. So if the platforms themselves are saying there's only one kind of human on this planet, both the marketer and the consumer are in that equation, we need to be clear with them. Can you give me some examples of clear ways that we can set ourselves apart or let the listener or reader know this is a human being coming to you and here's what you're about to get from me?
It sounds obvious, but it's not standard practice yet. Literally saying, this portion of the interview or the content or the conversation or the slides was generated by AI. Here's the tools that were used. Here's how those tools were used. Here's the exact models, etc. Christopher Penn and Katie Robert from Trust Insights are actually featured in the book for this exact thing. They do a great job with their transparency statements. Chris puts it at the beginning of every newsletter of I, the human, generated 20% of this, or I, the human, generated 80% of this. And he'll put it in the sections to say, here's the exact models and tools that I used. I've started doing this with my team internally. Whichever tools we use, obviously we use the Atlassian Rovo tool quite frequently. I used Rovo for the first draft of this, and then I, as the human, edited this portion. I used Confluence Audio to summarize this. I think the first thing is normalizing transparency. Right now, there's a witch hunt to spot people using AI. What you're actually trying to spot is whether you can trust someone. Is this slop or useful and quality? The reality is, humans can generate slop as well. It's harder for them to do it as quickly as they can with AI, but humans can write poor content. Humans can have stupid ideas. Humans can parrot nonsense talking points. And so that's part of the underpinning of the witch hunt for did you use AI to write this or to create this video, right? It's less that we have a problem with how tools are used and more that we have a problem with the quality of the actual substance of the ideas or content. So I think that's the first thing is being transparent. The second thing is taking a step back and understanding the value of what you're actually saying and putting out into the world. Humans can say and do stupid things too. A lot of people who are putting out hot takes that are not hot. There are a lot of people who are declaring themselves to be thought leaders when they have no thoughts and no leadership. I think the second thing is really being cognizant of who is the audience, what are their pain points, what are their challenges, what are you uniquely qualified to say and do to help them solve those problems and putting that out into the world. It's being transparent with the tools that you're using and then having actual substantive things to say to help people solve problems.
That substantive, or as people will hear throughout the book, we're hearing about depth, right? You really can't substitute. As soon as you get beyond that generic, vanilla dictionary definition of something, for you to say, look, I lived a project that completely blew up when I was trying to do this. Here are the things that I learned. the hard way, the scrapes, the scars. I will give you those, or I've developed, because I don't want anybody to live what I lived through, I've developed a handy guide, right? So those experience based, I'm taking you through, and we'll also get into how to insert those intelligently in what you know to be your buyer's journey. Because let's face it, if you are paying attention as a human, you should be able to figure out how they will go along discovering, understanding, and then eventually deciding to take an action. We as marketers have always been good at that. We need to be doing a little bit more of that. And you take this into things like how we should look at keywords, how we should try to move deeper into areas where the customer will understand by the way we talk, by our tone, by the words we use, how our mission is highly aligned with theirs. Tell me about that.
There's a couple of things in there. One myth is that jargon is bad. What a lot of people miss is that jargon is basically the insider language. The people who speak that insider language, to them, it's not jargon, it's just the way they speak. I give an example in the book. I'm part of different sports and musical theater communities. When I first entered those spaces, I didn't know the language and thought people sounded completely ridiculous. So one of the sports I do, it's called kiteboarding, and it's a wind and a water sport, and it's an extreme sport. And there's this concept of being lit when you're on the kite. It basically means that the wind is very strong and you're riding a kite that is really big and generating a lot of power. Nobody's going to come off the water. And if somebody says, "Oh, how was your session?" The wind was really strong and the kite was really big. It takes a lot of effort for me to say it. It takes a lot of effort for you to hear it. Instead, if I come off the water, I'm like, dude, it was lit. It was an extreme session. And that word means something very specific to the people in that community. If I say that in musical theater, "Oh, how was the rehearsal?" "Oh, it was lit." "What do you
You'll
mean it
get
was?"
some weird looks.
But if you say it to the kiters, they
Yeah.
know, right? And using the language of your audience is one of the ways that you show that you're in that community and that you are part of them and that you understand what they're saying. This goes for jokes. I've done a lot of developer and technical marketing in my career. And one of the concepts of basically the idea that like it works on my machine, that's a known joke. Another joke is my code is compiling. If you ever come upon a developer who appears to be wasting time, the
Yeah.
standard answer is, "My code's compiling." These are things that when you know them and you know how they're used, it signals that you understand the audience, right? And so sometimes we try to boil this down into a formula. We're going to compile our keywords to understand how people talk about this. And it's the point of keywords is yes, there's an SEO and a ranking component of that. But the reality is it's understanding the existing conversation so that you show up in the places where your audience is talking about their problems, the solutions that they that they're using, how they're implementing things. It does not have an inherent intent unless it specifically is like, what is the best tool for project management? Somebody is looking for a tool. Being keyword driven versus keyword aligned versus keyword informed, those are not the same things. A lot of marketing teams are trying to be keyword driven, where they're like, we're going to make this list. And now with LLMs, they're trying to be prompt driven. What's the
Yeah.
exact prompt
Yeah.
that makes us show up? Or how many prompts do we show up for in the LLMs? The core problem is the same. Your audience has a problem or an interest and they are having conversations. You want to show up in those conversations. Therefore, you need to know what the conversation is. You need to know a language that gets you into the right conversations and talking to the right people. When you show up in those conversations, you want to have credibility. Therefore, you need to speak the language of the audience. It's not, I need to like brute force the keywords somehow. That's not the strategy. The strategy is being so in tune with your audience in terms of how they speak and where they're speaking that you are showing up with credibility in those conversations. And that mindset shift is hard for some people to get. How do you talk about kiting? They don't know because they're in it. It's very hard for them to tell you the right way to talk to them because that's just how you talk. And so
Yeah.
it's an interesting shift to move away from find me the words to use in marketing to be so in tune with the audience that you naturally speak their language.
Yeah, that's it. That keyword informed can't be forced. You just have to be immersed
Right.
in what your audience does, how they do it, and how they talk about it. The people who would struggle the most with your version are people who are versed in a traditional funnel model. So we need to get a new paradigm that can explain how different members of our audience are finding out about what we do and the fact that they're taking a nonlinear approach. What's the approach that you favor?
My quippy way of putting this is the funnel is dead, use a playground instead. I like this idea of a playground methodology because it acknowledges that the audience does have a purpose. And I've seen other people talk about this as it's a pinball machine or it's a squiggly line and it's just all over the place. And I'm like, that implies that it's chaotic. I don't think that it is chaotic. And I think the problem is that as a marketer, we want it to be linear, awareness, consideration, decision, or a looping decision journey. If you're in SaaS, it goes awareness, consideration, decision, and then there's some sort of retention, cross-sell, upsell program that drops you back into awareness, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me because they're already aware, they're using the product, right? And we twist ourselves into knots trying to force people into these stages when the reality is nobody wakes up and decides to be in the consideration phase today. So if you think about a playground, what's the right way to play on the playground? Is it to go slides and then swing and then merry-go-round? Is it to skip the merry-go-round altogether? A lot of playgrounds have a park bench. Are you using the playground the wrong way if you just sit on the park bench? Of course not. All of the above are fine. The idea of using content the wrong way, right? Quote unquote wrong. My nephews, of course, you're supposed to go down the slide every time. They want to go up the slide,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And I think about this with pricing. Pricing is traditionally considered a bottom of funnel or a purchase level conversation. But if I need to go get budget, I have to have some concept of how much I'm spending. And you'll see there's rants on LinkedIn about this from a number of marketing leaders where they're like, Dear vendor, don't hide your pricing page because I can't get budget if I have no idea what I'm dealing with.
It
About
doesn't mean I'm at the
$5,000,
decision stage.
exactly, $50,000, $500,000. And from a marketing perspective, you may sit there and say, clearly you're already in a consideration phase if you're asking for budget. Okay, but then how did I get there? One of the big caveats with the funnel is that it basically only acknowledges the company perspective. I only recognize that you're quote unquote in the awareness phase or in the consideration phase when you raise your hand and tell me that. And it completely ignores all the stuff that happened before you got there, before I realized that you were
Right.
here. So when we think about this from a playground perspective, I recognize that somehow the kids got to the playground. Somehow they're going to leave the playground, right? I recognize that their parents actually have to bring them to the playground if they're young. They can't just get there on their own. It's just a much more robust framework. And we shift to thinking about creating the assets that people need via content depth and explicit intent, which is the next action for the audience. So instead of me just assuming you're in the awareness phase, so I'm going to shove three pieces of content at you, and then I'm going to assume that once you've consumed those three pieces of content, now it's time for you to go into consideration.
Yeah.
I don't get to make that choice. As a marketer, I need to make that journey so smart and seamless and make those handoffs seamless for you that you can go up, down, and sideways and get exactly what you need from a depth and a next action standpoint.
This is a theme I found myself hitting throughout the book. It wasn't that you are recommending a ton of new things that people must do. It was taking a fresh look at the way we're already doing things. So if we have, for example, an asset and it's gated, or we have a button says watch demo or view pricing or register, these are things that, like you said, people can approach from any direction. There are things that were already in play before they even arrived at this playground where they interact with these assets. And we need to figure out how to structure a journey that is not going to feel like we've taken all the fun out of the playground. And how have I seen that done? And how have I done that? I've done it when I've put a social post out, and the only purpose of my social post is to get a click onto the website. Or when I haven't been genuine with a long form article. My long form article has been aiming to try and get someone from having never heard of me to making a monetary decision about me. Or I've maybe thrown together too many things that are explicitly date dependent or place dependent, this event, webinar. And these all end up being jarring to the user now that I'm reading what you're saying and finding out about Goodhart's law. Maybe you can tell us about that, how we have gotten ourselves a little too fixated with making all these things that can push out metrics that we're going to report back to our management. What do we do to stop this madness?
Yeah. So you mentioned Goodhart's law. I'll give the definition of that. Basically, when a measure becomes the goal, it ceases to become a good measure. We see this a lot, right? Where we need to generate pipeline. That's the number one metric. So everything goes to pipeline generation, and we twist ourselves into knots to call things pipeline. And pipeline is actually like the next iteration of MQLs. And so how we got here with all of the gated assets is that we needed leads. And so marketing qualified leads, it was like anybody that fills out the form is an MQL. And marketers were like, we need to generate as many MQLs as possible. One of the ways to do that is to force everybody to fill out a form and then calling those email addresses contacts or leads.
Oh,
Then we realized that, oh, that's an easy metric to juice. So let's look at SQLs and the MQL to SQL conversion. And then we realized, okay, again, marketing can deliver, let's say, 1,000 MQLs. And then if sales is actually, we reject all of them. Or maybe sales is great, I'll call them all and I'll book a meeting and I'll do anything I need to do to book a meeting. So I'm going to give you a pair of headphones, a free lunch. I'm going to
right,
incentivize these meetings. So
right.
now the
Whether they're
MQL
ready or
got
not.
juice. So then we started saying, okay, we need to, and now we've arrived at like pipeline is the metric. Now we need to look at how many opportunities get open, how much pipeline is actually, and it's like, guys, we're just playing the same game, which is we as marketers are going to try to infer the intent of these customers and force them into a buying cycle. So this actually gets at this idea of trust and what's real and what's not. Part of the problem with a lot of these journeys and metrics is that we are baiting and switching our audience. The issue is not sales content is bad or trying to sell and trying to articulate your features, pricing, and benefits. The problem is when you tell the audience that's not what you're doing, you're not tricking anyone into buying. This is the real problem when we talk about nitty gritty CTAs. If your CTA is learn more and it takes you to contact sales, I'm not learning anything. I have to, you've
Yeah,
told me I'm going to learn, and now
right.
you're telling me I have to contact sales. You've broken my trust because you bait and switched me. Contacting sales is not a problem unless you've told me that's not what I'm doing. So, what we actually need to do is give the audience transparent opportunities to buy and not buy. Because that means when they are ready to buy, we've given them an explicit buying path and they know I'm going to contact sales. I'm going to sign up for a demo. I'm going to activate a free account. I'm going to request an RFP.
Yeah,
All of those are very clear buying actions, and I know exactly what I'm doing. And I know that I am now going to receive information about pricing or product features or service tiers. So the issue is not that we try to sell, the issue is that we pretend we are not selling. That's the first thing that breaks trust. And that starts all the way at the tactical CTA level. The second thing is that because we're trying to trick the audience into buying something when they're not ready, our metrics suffer. And so you'll see this where there's a couple of issues. One, people are trying to make every single asset, channel, touch point do all the things. We want to create
right.
awareness, consideration, purchase, and retain them. You cannot do all of that in a single moment. Quit trying to ask one asset to serve all the metrics. The second thing is having mismatched metrics to the intent. We need to match the CTA to the explicit audience intent and action. We have to match the metrics to the explicit intent and action. If the CTA is sign up for a free account, the metrics should be Signups. I talk about different intents in the book. One of the intents is this idea of trust or affinity, right? And this is what is traditionally considered thought leadership type of content, where we want them to know that we're smart and we're solving the problem and they can trust us and they like us, they have a good perception of us. The types of CTAs, download the report or read the article, the matching metric should be things like citations or references in press, backlinks from other places. It should be downloads. It should be entrances. It should not be product signups. Nobody is signing up from your state of the industry report. Sure, maybe there's a few folks who do that. Fine. But that's not the primary CTA. And we have to underpin it with trust in terms of being explicit. You're not tricking anyone into buying. And then matching the CTA with the explicit next action, and then matching the metric with the CTA.
Yeah. And the peso model, which Jenny Dietrich popularized, has pointed out that on digital, you can certainly have all of those outlets, but you pointed to the two that we have gamed when we've been so metric focused, the paid and the owned channels, right? It takes very little time for a marketer to crank either of those up. It takes longer to do things like earned, getting a highly coveted publication to post something of yours or to get those references and backlinks. Those are a little longer, yet if we're really optimizing for trust, we can do it. And you also point out that we have the ability, if we're looking and we're getting despondent that we don't have ways to speak at a conceptual level or strategic or tactical level to our prospect. If we look inside of our own content asset inventory, we probably do. Now, they may need optimized, right? Heck, we made some print publication, or we have been handing this thing out at trade shows, but that offline stuff never got brought into the picture with this highly fixated digital world we've been spending time on. Do you think there's more that we can do there?
I do. And I think this is something that, especially in the age of AI, we're seeing it come full circle. Everything feels so sterile and so short-term conversion focused and efficiency focused that you're seeing people circle back around to slow, handmade, human, artisan, right? Years ago, I wrote a blog post about the words homemade, handmade, handcrafted. It's a fascinating to look at. If I say I made you a homemade cake, that feels very impressive compared to I bought it at a store. If I say this is a handcrafted shirt or a handcrafted sweater, people who knit or crochet make handcrafted pieces. And that commands a premium. It's interesting that we're starting to see that in the B2B space with dinners. It's an intimate dinner,
Yeah.
a small dinner, an exclusive dinner, an invite only dinner. It used to be, what's the biggest stage I can stand on? I want to speak to 1,000 people, 5,000 people, 10,000 people. And now it's, you're telling me there's going to be 50 people at this dinner? Oh, how will I even talk to anyone? No, I want to go to the dinner where I'm one of 10, where I'm one of 15, where I'm one of 20. And so it's like we're coming back around to finding that huge audience on social media or digitally, and then doing our best to bring it down to that one-to-one connection, whether that's in person. ABM is having a moment. Account-based marketing is like exploding because everyone is finding that it's too noisy in the scaled spaces, particularly in paid. You mentioned the peso model, right? Part of the
Yeah.
reason that earned is also, again, all of these things are like having a moment because it's so much harder to game them with AI and automation. You can't just throw money at it and buy the reputation or attention. So you're seeing ABM come back up. You're seeing these small dinners come back up. You're starting to see more people talking about employee generated content or user generated content. You're seeing the creator economy and influencer marketing is having a whole moment. All of these are going from huge scaled programs that you can just dump money into things that do not scale. Fundamentally, they are very hard to scale. It's super interesting to see that we're coming back around. Somebody just posted about slow travel. They took a train for their vacation. There's a campaign I feature in the book about the city of Vienna. It was Visit Vienna, not hashtag Vienna. They specifically did not want you to post on social media. They wanted you to come, be present, drink the food, walk the
Hmm.
trails, go to the museums, just be in the city, spend your time and your money in the city, not spending all of your time on your phone posting pictures. I think we are seeing that those offline connections actually bring that deeper trust and affinity. You have to win the hearts and the minds before you can win the wallet. And we're starting to see more emphasis on how do we win those hearts and minds. It'll show up in the wallet. I think we're actually starting to come full circle after the insane climb up the hype cycle of AI.
I was just recently at a wedding, and the officiant began after people had started to see the wedding party. The officiant said, "That's great. You've got some early photos on your phone, but we want you to experience this through your own eyes, not through your screen. From here on, we're unplugged." And did that palpably change how that event was experienced? Social media is one of those interesting ones. You were talking about dumping money, and they will allow it. But even they, when they're looking at the trade-off between the attention of their users and their advertisers or brands, will diminish the role of the brands where it starts to hurt the experience of the users. And you point out that those non-scalable means of getting in front of people are even more important. Dark social, small groups, forums, that sort of thing, DMs even, they have a role to play. But we need to think about the content that we're putting across, even the voice. I mean, we can all tell, for example, when we're getting a personal email with you, I versus that blasted mass email, we, our, they, their. So we do have to do a little bit more to change how we're doing things. And you offer some practical ways. I want you to tell me a bit more about them. For example, you're not a big fan of having the brand do all the talking, and you're also not a fan of the brand working solely to use those impression metrics. You say that there are other metrics out there that we can use on social that will help us, but we really have to roll up our sleeves to get them. Tell us about that.
So I'll frame this up in terms of my social media spectrum. If you imagine it goes left to right on the far end, and I pair this with here's what the brand is trying to do on one end, and then here is what they want their followers to do in concert with that. So on the far end, we basically have communication, which is that one-way broadcast. I've got something to say and I'm going to communicate it to you. I'm going to shout it to you. What they want their followers to do in that case is to amplify the brand message, make it louder. How do we get that brand message out? Most companies understand that's not going to work on social media anymore. You can't just keep plugging a link to your webinar, a link to the blog. I'm going to shout and you're going to retweet, repost, whatever. In the middle of the spectrum, and I think this is where a lot of brands get stuck, is the conversation. And this, in theory, is a two-way conversation, right? But the problem is most brands want to talk about themselves. It's, yeah, we'll talk, but we want you to talk about us. In that case, what they want their followers to do is to advocate for them. You'll see this show up in things like number of comments on the brand LinkedIn post, number of mentions or branded hashtag use if you're on Instagram, for example. It's still the brand saying, we are the center of this conversation. Employees, tag the brand handle in to have conversations. Customers, talk about your experience with the brand. We're only going to have the conversation if we are the focus. The best brands are realizing we need to get all the way over to community. And if you look at the definition of community, it's a group of like-minded people striving to solve a problem or exchanging ideas together. Nowhere in there is there a buying or using or forcing agenda. They want their followers, whether that's employees, brand fans, customers, whoever it is, to be ambassadors. Go talk about the things that we care about and bring us into the right conversations. Brands can be participants, they can hold space, but they are not the drivers in the center of that conversation. The metrics in that case are obviously much more difficult, right? Because you can't just measure the branded hashtags or the reach. In the conversation phase, you're basically looking at the reach of the post and then the CTR, to an owned property. In the conversation phase, metrics are things like brand mentions or branded hashtag impressions. The community phase starts to get real difficult, right? Because in some cases, this isn't someone tagging you. It's, oh my gosh, Ashley is an employee. Glenn, who is at a Target account, has built a relationship with Ashley. Glenn is actually commenting a lot on Ashley's posts. Now you're telling me we got to start going and looking at, let's say, the comments on an evangelist's
Or asking
posts, right?
Ashley to share her stats with the marketing team. So it gets really gnarly. First level comments will actually do this. And I learned this from Michelle Raymond, former guest on the show. Second level comments are only seen on that person's own stats. If I was commenting on your own post about it, we really have to think about how we're going to track this. If I'm retorting to someone, we're getting into it, they're telling me, I found this, I found that, what did you find? This is the gold. This is where we're truly understanding things about our product. Product managers should be perking up their ears.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
learning maybe on a customer service issue that we didn't actually even see the brand being named, but we can infer they're talking about us. These are areas that if we really apply ourselves, we're going to have conversations and possibly even that community you speak of.
I mentioned Brooke Sellis and her company B Squared Media and the evolution of social care beyond just if somebody tags us or we've got a handle that somebody can reach us on social media 24/7 in a global company. It's that social listening, participating in the conversations. It's not just saying somebody actually tagged us or mentioned the product specifically. It's paying attention to the overall conversation, the trends, and being able to spot these issues, regardless of whether somebody specifically says, hey, brand, I want you to come talk to me. It's brand, listen,
Yeah.
anticipate,
Yeah.
and be there when people need it. And in some cases, taking preemptive action to create an asset or experience because you saw that this was a problem for existing customers. You've now taken action to prevent that for future customers as well. That whole
Yeah.
symbiotic relationship and this comprehensive social care and social listening is beyond just, oh, somebody mentioned the company or somebody tagged us with a complaint.
And even more about this spectrum that you've pointed out when you're trying to tell a marketer how to create content that's going to be used on this platform, that social care that may be needed in that crisis moment, the only way that you would have a hope of tactfully responding to that issue is that you have built up some goodwill. And that would take, I think, not only putting helpful content out there, maybe the person looked in the brand's direction because they thought they normally talk about how their product's being used. Maybe I'll learn something from that. No, that still hasn't dealt with my issue. But you also, I think, can apply a little bit of personality to the brand. And if you stay in that same voice when you're responding to that party, I think of Wendy's, for example, right? There are not that many brands that can have such a personal, off the cuff feel to them. We're back.
Yeah, having that personality and equipping your fans, your users, your customers, your employees, your partners, your investors to understand the vision, the mission, the core problem set allows you to scale that. So it's not just one poor social media manager desperately trying to keep up with every mention or every DM. And all of this has to translate into real life. This is true for individuals too, which I know we'll talk about in a few minutes around influencers, thought leaders, and subject matter experts. People want to see not just the authenticity from the brand, but from the people who work at that brand or who are advocating and being ambassadors for that brand. And so being congruent in terms of the substance of the ideas, the tone of voice, how you show up in person, online, in writing, and in videos builds trust and contributes to the brand experience. What on social media is just one small piece of that experience. It's also what you experience in the product when you deal with employees, customer success managers, or evangelists from the brand. All of that shapes the experience and has to feel cohesive. And we keep getting back to that trust of being clear on who you are, who you help, and how you help them. That's the way that you make this mindset shift to building the trust. It's not just jumping on the latest trends. It's not just having, here's my
Mm.
list of keywords that everybody has to say in every conversation. It's truly that mindset shift and being empathetic and understanding that vision all the way around.
Yeah, and back to the doing less, not more, for any of those who are still stung by maybe hopping on Clubhouse or maybe Threads, if you have been jumping on a fad because you thought you should, not that your audience is there, listen to Ashley. There's no reason to do those things if you can just get back to the fundamentals that are congruent with what your audience is already doing. And you've slid us into the last part of the book talking about the people that are doing this. You point out that there are some executives and sometimes founders of brands who themselves have a far larger social following than the brand itself. And that we shouldn't squander that opportunity. But what I'd love to get your comment on is the brand already has several good things that it can do in talking about what people are experiencing. It can help them find solutions to problems. It can educate them on maybe things about products that they didn't know or things about diving into this category if they're trying to deepen their knowledge. But there's only one thing that you can have humans doing, particularly a thought leader. What's that?
Yeah, so I alluded to it, and it's funny you mentioned Michelle Raymond. She says this is my favorite thing I've ever said, which is if you want to be a thought leader, the definition is right there in the words. Have thoughts, be a leader. And I think that the humans, regardless of what the tools are and how smart the tools become, humans are the ones that have the thoughts. Humans are the ones that experience the problems that require someone to think of the solutions, right? Tools can help us implement solutions. Tools do not generate thoughts. And as much as AI, everyone's like, it's magic, it generated an idea. No, it didn't. It fundamentally didn't. It took the knowledge of humans and synthesized that in some cases in a quote unquote new way. But just because you haven't heard of how it's been implemented, right, or
Right.
articulated,
Doesn't
some human
mean.
somewhere articulated it, and
Right.
AI is just using statistical word association to say what the humans have already said. So the humans are the ones that have to have the idea. There's a conversation right now, it's very trendy to talk about having taste and that humans are the ones that have taste. We
Mm.
curate, etc. I struggle with this a little bit because part of where taste, at least from a marketing perspective, the concept that it's building off of is design principles. And design professionals can articulate good design just because
Yeah.
you in adjacent crafts know it when you see it and can't define it. In fact, there are professionals who can define it.
Like a sommelier can describe wines.
So I struggle a little bit with the idea that humans, the differentiator is taste, and the idea that taste is undefined. Like, I actually think there are many professions where taste is defined. Just because you don't have that expertise doesn't mean it's unknowable. I actually do think that for me, it's more rooted in two things. One is the core of the idea and the substance, and then two, the relationship. And again, I know it is very trendy right now. People are using AI as a therapist. There have been people who have fallen in love with an AI girlfriend or an AI boyfriend. Fundamentally, we know what relationships and empathy require. We have words for those. We teach those words to our children. They vary across cultures, and we can articulate the differences in how those things show up from a cultural perspective. Ultimately, what you feel when you shake someone's hand, give someone a hug, look them in the eye, or toast that glass of wine, that feeling is fundamentally human and fundamentally different than what you feel when you watch a concert, when you watch a movie, when you go online. We can feel a lot of things from technology. It is fundamentally different when it is human. So for me, those differentiators are around the ideas in terms of origination and then that connection that you feel when you actually have that relationship with a person.
You call them the four pillars: credibility, your own profile, your level of being prolific with what you generate, and the depth of those ideas. Now, There's all sorts of different fields out there. And I know that in marketing, some of us, if we compare ourselves to Seth Godin or Ann Handley represents the marketing profs brand, but she herself dwarves the marketing profs brand with her own following and the quality of her content. We don't have to shrink at this. You say that we should look at the relative group that we are trying to baseline against, or maybe if we're helping one of our management team, our leadership reach their own. If you're in the ball bearing industry, there's probably not that many people you need to get past to be one of the main drivers of how the ball bearing market should be thinking about the future. And you also say, look, pick a pillar at a time. Figure out how from today to next quarter to a year from now, someone can be stepping up on this. I love the one that you gave, and it was an offline example where you were talking about the ways that you can be involved offline. So you say, all of us know that it would be great to be a keynote on a national stage in front of thousands, but maybe we should be thinking first, if we haven't done any public speaking, that we're looking at a regional round table or a panel and having some involvement and then building up a body of experience as well as maybe some sound clips that we can put in front of someone to show our peers that we are speaking for something more than just what anybody could read in our trade journal. And that's the next one I wanted to ask about is how do you think we could bring rigor to the content that we should be making if we truly are leading how people think about what we do?
So if you want to lead the conversation, you have to be on the bleeding edge of all of the strategies, tactics, tools, thinking, research, etc. One of the big things that companies miss is they think somebody's going to go off into a corner and think smart thoughts by themselves. That's not how it works. You have to give time to actually come up with a hypothesis, do the research on it, test how you've implemented it, and then give other people and teams time to take those conclusions, implement them, test them, report out on did it work, did it not work, and then iterate on it. Most companies are like, we're going to do a survey of our customers about how they're using our products, and we're going to call that original research and thought leadership. That is looking at the customer data of how they use their products. That's great. You can sell a lot of products with those types of customer proof points. But
One could argue
you should be doing that already. But that is very different than pushing the industry forward and trying to lead that conversation, making sure that you give your people space to think, test, and codify, and then giving your teams or other people in the industry access and time to the stuff you've codified so they can test and implement it themselves. If it works, great. Now you've got that leading thought. In terms of the rigor, applying some of the same scientific principles, it doesn't have to have the exact same level of rigor as we see in science, medicine, or academia, but we can take many of the principles from those other areas and apply those to say, how do we get something that is more unique, that is truly groundbreaking or leading thoughts? The other myth about this is that the best content is thought leadership content, or the best type of person is a thought leader. The reality is, just like with our CTAs and our metrics, the same thing applies from a thought leadership perspective. You can make a lot of money being that visionary and leading the conversation, both as an individual and as a brand, using that type of person or that type of content in your marketing mix. However, that is long-term results that tend to drive trust and affinity, not short-term results that tend to drive revenue conversion.
right.
So
Don't smush them together.
exactly, don't smush them together. And there's two other types of creators that I score with these pillars. One is the subject matter expert. These folks tend to have high credibility. They actually tend to be quite strong in depth of ideas. They tend to be weak in profile and being prolific. These folks are great. They tend to sit on a customer success team. They might be your solution engineers. These are the go-to people internally. They know your customers really well. They know your products really well. They know the problems and existing solutions very well. These folks are great for creating demos, for speaking at user conferences, for joining late stage sales calls to help your customers. But that's a completely different type of person driving a very different outcome on a different time horizon than a thought leader. I also talk about influencers. These folks tend to have very high profile, middle of the road credibility. You're not going to have influence if you don't have some credibility. They tend to be prolific in a single channel. So LinkedIn influencer, YouTube influencer, podcast influencer, whatever it is.
It's largely an audience that you can't get in front of today.
Exactly. They help you reach a new audience. They tend to be fairly low on depth of ideas because they're just talking about existing problems and solutions. But they help you get in front of a new audience. They can help you drive traditional awareness goals and in some cases short-term revenue goals. If it's here's the 5 new products or I use this product, here's a product reveal, here's a product walkthrough where they have that credibility. So each of them helps you achieve different goals. They help you reach different audiences. The time horizons are different. We need all of those types of creators in the marketing
Right.
mix. You can make a lot of money being any of those types of creators. It's getting back to what is the audience problem that we're trying to help them solve? Who is the best person, the best channel, the best asset to help solve that problem and articulate that? That's what we need to be looking at as we craft our marketing mix, not just, well, thought leadership is the best content. So we're going to call everything thought leadership and we're going to call anyone who has a big title a thought leader. But
Yes.
that's not how it should work.
The number of things that we can use there, I thought of it as different parts on a musical score. They're all playing together like a symphony. There are valid reasons for using those influencers. I have been in organizations where they've been leery of using those subject matter experts because there's high turnover in those jobs. They each have their place. Your founder obviously isn't going anywhere, but we have to take these together. And I really appreciated how the criteria for what thought leadership content should do came out. You said that content has to be designed to have an impact on the reader, how they can either think differently about what they're doing or how to act, how they work, right? If you didn't know this is maybe a long-term goal that you should be moving yourself towards. That is the key thing that will differentiate that thought leadership content. I also appreciated how you said that the ways you can demonstrate thought leadership are practices that you used yourself in the book. So I'll call out the number of case studies, which you obviously had to go completely primary source on, and the other explicit stating that this was made by you for the hours that it takes for someone to write a book. They are not taking any shortcuts. You stated very matter-of-factly that you typed every word of this with your own 2 hands. And I guess we need to make that explicit today. Since ChatGPT has come out, we need to say this, and that same level of involvement, of giving a hug, shaking someone's hand firmly, looking them in the eye. These are things that when you're delivering that content with these other pieces around, there's no mistaking that person has come away. They understand what you've worked on. They have understood the hard things that you've put in from the special social graph that is Ashley's and no one else's. These are things that we can get there. It just left me with a wonderful way of understanding how the playground, with its idea of different depths, the social media spectrum that blends both personal and social channels, and those experiences that are really different and that only thought leaders will have with those insights, that can end up showing that person who's out there that we are like them. We're doing our best to know how they see the world and what they're struggling with, and we're trying to help. And I guess that's what it all comes down to, is just trying to help.
Again, I think fundamentally as marketers, our job is to match problems with solutions. And we need to do that for people. There's a human on both sides of the screen. And when you build that trust that I have the solution to your problem, the revenue will follow.
Ashley, I encourage people to grab this book and take some of the lessons that you've laid out very clearly if they're interested in that or in finding out more about what you do and getting a hold of you, where can they do that?
I am most prolific on LinkedIn. So if you search for Ashley Faus, I should come right up. I do post, in some cases, discounts and links for the book. You can find the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's in all the places you would normally buy. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn, I do occasionally post some discounts for the book as well.
Great. We'll have links for all of those in the show notes. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for a great conversation.
I hope that the listeners came away with some way that they can look into their funnel even further and make it better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.